listeners, and welcome to another episode of Subscription Scaled. I'm your host, Nick Frederick. With me today, our guest is Craig Hewitt, who is the CEO of Castos. Craig, welcome to the show.
Hey, Nick, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Glad to have you here. Let's start at the very beginning here. Tell us a little bit for the listeners that don't know what Castos is and how you came to start it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Castos is a podcast hosting and analytics platform. We've been in business for about 5 years. The predecessor before that was a kind of productized service business called PodcastMotor, which we've since kind of rolled into the Castos umbrella. It does kind of done for you podcast editing and production for about 85 customers right now. And so all in all, I've been in the podcasting business and doing subscription, based revenue businesses for about 7 years.
Okay. So did you run a subscription business before that, or this has all been a part of podcasting?
Yeah, all part of this entrepreneurial journey. I have a background in sales. So, in a totally unrelated field, but like we saw the value of subscription kind of based stuff. I was in the medical field, and sold a lot of disposable, medical products, to cardiac units in hospitals. And so I was able to see like, hey, you get a client there or a customer there, and they just keep buying stuff from you. So, not exactly a subscription, but some kind of predictable recurring revenue.
Yeah, definitely recurring for sure. Well, tell us a little bit what led you to leave that field and come over to start this journey.
Yeah, I think in hindsight, I think it was probably a bit of a midlife crisis. I had, my son was born in 2012, and I was on the road just traveling all the time and missed a bunch of, big milestones in his first few years. And I was like, this is garbage. And this is not like how I want to live. And was big into podcasting. I was like, this seems cool, and started a podcast of my own and was like, wow, this is really hard. I think, which is what a lot of folks see now. This is before even tools like Riverside and Descript and things like that. And so, yeah, it was just like, man, there's got to be a way to make money here. And, it turns out that doing post-production work still is a super valuable thing to do for folks. And that's how I got started with that business, and had a chance to acquire a piece of software, which was the beginning of the Castos business. We acquired a WordPress plugin called Seriously Simple Podcasting. And that's how we kind of started the SaaS side of the business. About 5 years ago, we launched.
Gotcha. Well, how have you seen podcasting change? I mean, go back 5 years, it wasn't what it is today. So what have you seen, and happen?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious one is it's just so much more competitive, right? So again, technology has made it more accessible for a lot of folks. I think that simultaneously makes it better and worse, or easier and harder for us as creators. Easier because it's just easier to create content, harder because there's so much more competition in the space now that for you to make a really good podcast and ultimately, like, this is for your brand, right? Whatever it's a personal brand or a business or whatever, like, you want to make an impact on some kind of end goal that isn't necessarily downloads, right? For most kind of, B2B folks, the downloads is not the ultimate game. It's some kind of business impact. And so, like, I think just being able to see that happen and kind of wade through the competition that we all have now is probably the biggest difference. The tools and technology and the hardware even is fantastic, but it's made standing out even harder. Which is cool because it just means that people that are creating really great content can stand out in just a larger audience overall. Like, if you look at the total podcast listening audience, it's going up, quite a bit all the time. So the onus is on us as creators to create really good stuff.
For sure. Do you see the B2B podcasting space fundamentally different from B2C, and in what ways?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to what I was saying is like the goal of the podcast, right? Like, in a B2B sense, like, maybe it's a little bit of branding. If you think about Drift as like in the SaaS world, it's like the ultimate, I think, example of that is like they probably podcast just for brand equity, not necessarily to get a bunch of customers, but just to be able to share how they think about a bunch of business related things with kind of the greater SaaS and tech audience. And that's fantastic. And then they got to kind of loosely draw like the ROI back to the business somehow from there. And that's hard to do. And that's a little fuzzy. And that probably can only happen with like funded or like more established businesses. In a B2C kind of environment, like the end game is downloads, right? Because you're probably directly monetizing your podcast with ads or paid subscriptions, and so just eyeballs or eardrums is like the end game, and there's not this kind of connection back to some sort of business goal in kind of B2C podcasting, which is why just different genres like true crime are so much more successful in a real kind of B2C consumer environment.
Yeah. Those metrics are a lot more concrete there, huh? Where you can see the downloads, you can see the engagement, and things like that. Where creating a brand and content around the brand and kind of what that generates downstream in front of it, whether you're just seeking out brand recognition or you're actually looking for direct clients and revenue, like tracking that becomes a heck of a lot harder, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Do you have any suggestions for those going down this B2B path, like what they should be paying attention to?
Yeah. I mean, at first, like when we work with clients in our kind of launch services, the first thing we say is like, hey, not to say we don't want to work with you if you're only going to do 10 episodes, but it's just unfair, right? Like it's unfair for you to go through the trouble of learning all this stuff and getting the gear and investing your time and mental energy in this if you're only going to do 10 episodes. And so we really say like you should plan on doing this for a year before you even look at your analytics dashboard and try to make any kind of business decision about like whether this is working or not. It just takes, if you're doing an episode a week, it takes those 50 episodes for you to learn how to be a podcaster, learn what your audience wants, learn what resonates with them, and then start being a little more constructive about like what to do then. Just kind of, we tell a lot of our customers like, hey, commit to this and put the blinders on, right? And don't worry about it. It's like, being on a diet, right? It's like, don't step on the scale for the first month, just stick to the diet. And I think that doing that lets them not worry about the future as much, but worry about the present and say like, how can I create really good content? How can I focus on executing this stuff? And I think that's where we see folks be more successful is they're not worried about the future as much. They're worried about today and what can I do to create great content and use this as like a content marketing piece for my business. So I think that's like the first thing. And the second thing is like, if you're a business, you should not think that you're going to directly monetize your podcast. And that's probably obvious to a lot of folks, but like you shouldn't sell ads, right? In your podcast, if it's a B2B kind of thing, right? The thing you're selling is your business, right? And you're going to get leads and trial signups and these kind of things. And so just kind of not thinking like your NPR or Gimlet Media, right? But like, think like, okay, I'm going to do this podcast so I can share kind of how I think about our industry with the audience. I'm also going to do this podcast to network with a bunch of other people in my space. And I think that's like the untold thing in podcasting, and maybe it's less untold than it used to be, is for B2B folks, like the ability to network is one of the huge advantages of podcasting, right? Because you're having a conversation with someone that you probably can't have an hour-long conversation with just because you want to, but because you're offering some value to them of, I'm on this podcast sharing what I think about podcasting and subscriptions. And that's a huge value to me, right? So I say yes to let's have this podcast. There's not a lot of other ways that folks can do that to an audience of peers that they don't know very well.
I'm curious to get your perspective on how you strike the right balance here, because the early advice that we got when we started this podcast was, again, similar to that, great way to network, great way to meet potential clients, is to have these conversations. And I've listened to other B2B podcasts that certainly can come across like one person trying to sell the other person something. And so to anyone not part of that conversation, sometimes it's hard to derive any value from that. So what's your philosophy on how to make sure that you're still, producing a good podcast that listeners will find valuable, but yet still striking that balance with maybe some of those other goals?
Yeah. I mean, I think that this has happened to us more than a couple times. One, just because like I have like 500 episodes under my belt. We have a podcast that I think is pretty successful in the podcasting space and a big YouTube channel and all this kind of stuff. And what ends up happening is when we go out to partner with someone or even hiring, like that's another thing that like a lot of companies don't think about, is like your podcast and your digital presence is your CV, right? As a brand. And for me personally, because I'm the CEO of the company. And so when we go to try to hire someone, and this happened to us recently, we went to try to hire this really senior developer, and he knew me and he knew our podcast. And so It was so easy to say like, hey man, let's do this. And he was on board, as soon as we posted the job posting. And we see this with like industry partners is, we might go to someone and say, hey, like, let's collaborate on this thing. And they say, yeah, cool. I see all the stuff you're doing. I see the podcast you put out. I see your YouTube channel. I see your blog content. I see your product. It's a natural fit. I don't have to sell myself and my values because I've done that every week, right? In the content that we put out there. And it's not just a one-to-one thing, right? I don't have to have this one conversation with this one industry partner. I'm able to create this for us, like what I think is an enormous body of content, and hopefully a bunch of people in our space know it and know me and know our brand because of that, and then opens these doors to kind of a bunch of different opportunities that we have from there.
How have you 500 episodes? Congratulations, that's pretty amazing. We're at 80 now, and I it's far past where I ever thought we'd go with this. So
Congratulations,
I feel
that's
accomplished
awesome.
with 80, but 500, my goodness. How have you evolved it? Going from episode 1 all the way up to 500. Is anything different now than when you started?
Yeah, I think the obvious one is like I'm not nervous anymore, right? Because I just that you click go and Riverside has this 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I'm like,
You're
okay,
on.
that's like intimidating for new people. Like and in that vein, one of the things I've learned, and I learned it pretty early on, but I think it's a really good tip for beginner podcasters is like this will be edited, right? Even if you're going to put the video on YouTube, you probably won't edit that as much as you would audio. But if I mess up or my kids barge in the door right now or something, it's cool, right? Just stop and I can usher my kids out or answer their question or do whatever. If I have a coughing fit because I just had COVID, it's okay, right? Like it's not live. I'm not on stage. It's a podcast or it's a video and we can edit it. And it's fine if it's imperfect. And if in an interview-based show, giving your guests that grace to say like, hey, we're going to edit this. If you mess up, just stop. Take a sip of water and start that whole kind of thought again. And in post-production, the team will edit that out. Like that's a really big one because it puts me as a host or my guests at ease that like, hey, we don't have to nail this the first time. Another big one I learned like the hard way because we just did a terrible job of this at the beginning is like, if you're an interview-based show, then relying on your guests to share the content out and setting that expectation really super clearly when you invite them on is a huge growth opportunity that a lot of folks give up on because they don't want to be a jerk.
Yeah.
They don't want to say, hey, come on my podcast. And I expect you to share this out on social media, in an email newsletter, and on your site, if you could, please. They don't want to ask that. And like, I have a sales background, so maybe I'm just more okay with asking folks for stuff. But like I say, hey, I'm going to have you on my podcast. We have 5,000 listeners and they're going to hear what you have to say for an hour. The least you can do is share this out when it goes live. I think it's a totally fair ask of almost any situation. And if you don't do it up front, right, when you're inviting someone on, the person's not going to do it when you send them that email later. Yeah. So set the expectation up front and then follow through that with like a good, well-organized email and template and kind of like media kit so that you're not asking the guest to do a bunch of freaking work to share your stuff out. So give them the audiogram or the quote card, send them the little snippet in a tweet or something like that. So that it makes their job easier.
Makes it easier for them. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then I think, the other one that like is like the most important is just consistency, right? So like in your 80 episodes, like you got to publish them consistently. It doesn't have to be every week. It doesn't have to be twice a week. It could be once a month even. But just do it on the same cadence all the time because it's a zero-sum game for your listeners, right? They only have 6 hours of podcast listening in their week. And if you flake out for 2 months, they're going to replace you with someone else. And when you come back those 2 months later, they're going to be like, whatever, man, Nick like isn't serious about this. So I'm not going to take him seriously.
Yeah. It's been surprising to me. Like you can't always see, in fact, you can't see who's on the other end of those downloads, the listens to your episode. But I've gone to conferences and ran into people and they were like referencing some episode of a podcast. And I was like, I would have never expected you to be, someone who was, tuning in and listening. But, it's fascinating. It does open up a lot of doors and, has some unexpected benefits that, certainly when I got into it, I was not expecting.
Yep, it's
One other
fantastic.
thing
Yeah.
that's been really surprising to me, or just another benefit that I didn't expect to get out of doing all of these episodes, was talking to all these founders and people that run subscription businesses, is hearing what their, lessons learned, their journey, their obstacles that they might be facing today affected our product roadmap. Like, I got to see what their problems were, and interview so many people, like, probably any good product manager would do, and then incorporate those things into our product, was something that seems obvious now, but back then I just didn't expect it kind of going into it. But that's been, I don't know, something that's just been extremely valuable to me for sure.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. It makes, I mean, I've not heard that before, but it makes a ton of sense, right? Like you hear these folks who are going to go start a new business in an industry they don't know really well, doing all this kind of customer discovery stuff. And those are hard phone calls to get, right? Hey, random business owner, can I interview about like what the biggest problem you're having at your gym is? Like, nobody's going to take that call, right? But like, hey, I'm starting a podcast about
Yeah,
like leading gym owners and how they, grow their bottom line. Yeah, sure, a bunch of people are going to talk to you because it's free PR for their gym.
absolutely. Yeah.
That's cool.
So has your business been subscription right from the get-go, and do you offer any of your services a la carte?
Yeah, this is interesting. It has been subscription from the very beginning, both like with our services and with the hosting. Um, we've been subscription all along. We have a couple of kind of slightly different flavors of that. Like we have some add-on services that are variable each month, right, based on usage.
Hmm.
Um, and we have kind of just recently, like, within our services arm, we help folks launch a podcast, right? So you come to us and say, "Hey, Craig, y'all are like, industry leading knowledge, been doing this for umpteen years. We'd love for you just to tell us exactly what to do." And so we offer that as a service. And that's cool because it helps podcasters get off on the right foot. But it is not recurring revenue necessarily. It's kind of chunky revenue, right? So it's
Hmm.
like, hey, we're going to sell this thing and we're going to work with you for 2 months. And then like you probably will roll into our ongoing services afterwards. And that is the expectation. But it's been interesting from like a business operations perspective to go from like purely subscription across the board to adding on a little of this chunkiness, right? Of like kind of one time, and it is entirely one time. Like they could roll into recurring revenue afterwards, but if someone pays us $10,000 today, they're not going to pay us $10,000 next month or the month after. They might pay us $800.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that's been interesting. Like you kind of have to discount that one-time revenue a little bit when you're doing things like budgeting and planning, as opposed to like, how like a true subscription service is like, it's 100% predictable. You have churn or you have new customers, and
Hmm.
that's the math.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's been interesting to learn.
Well, especially with those, chunky services that you're referring to there, those often take a lot of labor to deliver too, right? To get a new podcast up and running. How have you been able to kind of manage the ebbs and flows of that demand alongside your subscription services?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the only way we've been able to do that is that the subscription part is so easy, right? Like, especially with software, right? You build the software once and a bunch of people use it in all the same ways. And the only air quotes, because it's not a small thing, but the only thing you have to do is, support the customers, right? And customer support and success, and then build new features and improve the ones you have. But you don't have to help the actual implementation of the podcast because that's what software does. Yeah, with the services, we're fortunate to have a really great team that handles most all of that. But yeah, that is people doing work and not computers. And so it ultimately comes down to processes and communication and expectations and a lot of tools to do all of those and optimize them and create a really great customer experience. But yeah, it's just a different world. It's almost like running two businesses.
It really is. And my business is in the exact same boat. And we do a whole lot of professional services, both to deploy our software that then does produce the recurring revenue, but a lot of other just one time, help them with a transition, maybe do a vendor RFP or something like that. But, again, for us, staffing those ebbs and flows and spreading out the projects so that you're not overloaded one month and then, looking for things to do the next one is always a big challenge.
Yeah. But I'll tell you, like, I think that it's something that a lot of pure play SaaS folks kind of frown at, right? They're like, I'm not going to get involved. I'm not going to talk to customers. I'm just going to build a product and people are going to come magically find me and use my thing. And it's all sunshine and rainbows. The problem is literally every time we sell our software to a big company, they buy our services too. Every time. Because what you're doing when you're selling software is you're selling a part of the solution that a big company needs. Because they don't have the ability like you and I do, because we're small businesses, to just figure it out, right? They don't have like super entrepreneurial, for the most part, right? Super entrepreneurial folks on their team who can read the 7 blog posts and watch a couple of YouTube videos and figure out how to podcast. They need a professional person to tell them how to do it, right? Or how to implement the new software or whatever it is. And so what we found is like, and I think this is a model that will continue into the future. And you've seen it a little bit recently, like in the SaaS space with a couple of big exits, and Profitwell is the one that comes to mind for me, $200 million, right? Like that started as an agency and then into a productized service, and they built software. And in the end, they were doing a little bit of all of those. I don't know what the breakdown of revenue is, but it's not terribly important, because like, I think offering the services, and to whatever kind of tolerance you have, as a business person. And if you're a tech person and you don't want to offer a lot of services, that's fine. But just know that you're going to be giving up a little bit of upside with your customer if you're only offering one side of that coin.
It's also tough to look at some of those big ticket, SOWs for those professional services and ever turn away from that, right? It's like,
yeah.
But you got to find that right balance too, because that does take a lot of labor and effort to deliver compared to that predictable cash flow that, the ongoing software or the subscriptions will provide, right? So, again, balancing act, try to find out what works or what you can support and what works best for your type of business, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we say no to a good bit of folks who come to us and say, hey, I want you to just do this, or I want to do this kind of podcast. I want to do a true crime podcast. We're not the best person to help you there. We do B2B interview based shows or, panel shows. We don't do true crime docuseries kind of things, just because that's not our wheelhouse. We'd love to share contact information with a few of our friends in the industry, but that's not what we do. And that's the only way we've found to be able to continue to offer a relatively similar product service, to our services customers, without like reinventing the wheel every time. Because we're not an agency, and I don't want to be an agency. I want to be a service that does about the same thing for this one type of customer, and we do it really well.
Did you start that way from the beginning, like pure B2B and turning everything else away, or you kind of did both for a while and then turned down that path?
No. Yeah, I mean, I was whatever you want me to be, I'm happy to help. And it was terrible. And you learn the hard way, right? You learn that you are not meeting customer expectations because they want something that you can't do. And that's really hard. And they get really upset and you get really upset. But now, yeah, we're really quick to say, we're not the right fit. I'm sorry. And we say that in the sales process, right? Like, hey, I'd love to help you. And you're happy to spend your money here, but this is not for you. Like what we do is not right for what you're looking for. And I think
it must feel really good to be in a spot where you can actually do that, though.
Yeah, I mean, the customers really respect that, right? They say, wow, thanks for not, leading me on and, sending me down a path that would end up in all of it just being frustrated. Yeah, I think it's a real important thing for any, and maybe especially if you're just getting started, right? Because like if you're just getting started and you try to be everything for everyone, you're not focusing on your ideal customer at all. And I think that just distracts you so much from building a business that's scalable and repeatable and you can take yourself out of, right? Because like 100% without fail, the times where I have to get involved in like delivering a service or like being on the front line of something with a customer, because we do have a team, right? Like we do have a team that does the actual kind of implementation and manages customer communications and expectations and stuff. 100% when I have to get involved in that directly is when it's outside of the bounds of what we do normally, because we've solved for like the standard kind of use case and customer and thing that we deliver.
Well, let's talk about how you are acquiring new customers, new podcasts today. Like, what channels are you going through to find those that are, and is it a process of mostly educating them on the value of podcasts and getting them to start one? Or is it you're only going after people who are in the market? They know this is something that they need and want to do, and therefore are looking for a vendor.
Yeah, it's interesting. I posted about this on LinkedIn today. I think that so we acquire almost all of our customers through inbound and a little bit of referrals. But we've done content marketing for years and are very fortunate to have a lot of kind of SEO juice behind our site and just have a bunch of articles there that people find us and sign up for our services, either on the hosting side or the services side through content marketing and word of mouth and referrals. And I think that probably is the answer for most small businesses. I think there are some exceptions to that where people acquire new customers through, outbound email. I think that's just getting harder all the time through conferences. Maybe that's the one that that's just not our world, but I know it is, especially the more B2B you get, going to conferences is a really big deal for some companies I know. But yeah, we've done content marketing and SEO and inbound for so long, and it's gotten us where we are today. And I think, what's interesting is I think it gets harder because you do the easy stuff first, right? You acquire this kind of group of customer, this particular type or whatever. And then that channel is saturated, or that kind of part of that channel is saturated. And then you got to move to the next level or iteration of that. And that's where it just gets a little bit harder. But I think that we have thousands of customers and all of them have come through inbound marketing. I think we have at least 3 times as many as we have now before that channel is saturated. And we have to go, figure something else out. I think there's just so much room to grow, and it usually is a lot more than you think it is.
So specifically, is this the content you guys are publishing to LinkedIn on your own website? And then is it all SEO, or are you doing paid ad search, what kind of combination of all of those things?
Yeah. So it's we don't do any paid acquisition right now. Played around with it, couldn't get it to work in a cost-effective manner, right? It always works, but you end up losing your shirt over it. So it's we write a lot of blog content and have a lot of just other kind of non-blog written content on our sites, comparison articles and things like that. We have a prolific podcast and YouTube channel. And we do a little bit of social media. It's the one place that I'm not a big social media person. And as I run marketing, I just, it's not my thing. But I know that it is something we should do more of and do better. But I don't know. Yeah. I mean, again, I just think we have so much more kind of meat on that bone, right? Of content marketing and inbound that's where I'd rather focus my work. And, at some point we'll probably bring someone on to do social media, just because it's not me.
So the average new client then is going online, knowing that they need to start a podcast, starting to do some searches and poking around in places like that, might come across some of your content and go, oh, these guys are one of the experts in this space.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that works because all we're having to do is convince them that we're the solution that they're looking for. They already, there's this thing of I'm problem aware, I'm solution aware, and there's a couple of other steps there, right? But somebody goes from oh, I'm going to think about a podcast to, oh, I should start a podcast to how the heck do I start a podcast? And then, oh, I need a hosting company. When they get to that stage, they're going to evaluate us versus a couple, handful of different options. And that's the only kind of battle we have to win, as opposed to if you're doing outbound, you start way the heck over there, right? And say hey, company, you need to dedicate, all these resources and time and mental energy to a podcast. Oh, and we're the best service, and a bunch of steps in between there. So I think that that's why inbound works so well, is that people are already ready to buy your stuff. And you just have to get in front of them at the right time. Things like outbound prospecting, cold outreach, and even paid is a little closer, right? Because paid search, people are looking for that thing, and you're just showing up at the top of that list. The tough thing is just making the numbers work.
Well, and getting that ad with a keyword in front of somebody who actually has an intent to buy and isn't actually looking for something else entirely or tangential to what you do, that's a challenge, right?
Yep.
With cost per click, what it
Yep.
is right now, anybody who's clicking on your ad that isn't a target customer is going to cause you to use your words, lose your shirt.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I think, I mean, for us specifically, like we have a relatively low, like average, ARPU, like average revenue per user. And so it's just tough to make that math work. If we're selling a $200 a month thing, easier.
Well, so talk us through what it takes to bring a client on board from the time that they're like, okay, I want to work with you guys. Like, what does that process look like? Is it a lengthy process, or is it something that's kind of self-serve? Like, what does that look like on average?
Yeah, on the hosting side, it's entirely self-serve. So folks come to the site, they say, "Yep, I want to sign up for a free trial." We offer a 14-day trial, no credit card. They just put in their name and email address, and they get 14 days to use the platform as much as they'd like. Within that time, hopefully, we show them that it's an awesome tool, and that like we encourage them in a lot of like non-product podcast related things, because that's the challenge. It's a challenge of ours, and I don't know how universal it is to other pieces of software, but like to get value from Castos, you have to do work. You have to record this episode, and then you have to edit it, and you have to then publish it to Castos, and then you have to like market your podcast and grow it so that it's making a difference for your brand. And so there's a lot of things that customers need to do outside of our tool to get value out of using our tool. And so we do a lot of education with our customers for them to be successful in general. And we're just like our software is just a part of that. So that's, I don't know that it's our biggest challenge, but it's definitely a thing that we focus on, is like, hey, how can we help you be more successful in general in this realm? And our software is one part of that. And hopefully we take a bunch of friction away from like the publishing and distribution, part of it. But there's other stuff that you have to do that we can help with from an education or from a services perspective.
So once they're in, are you guys taking them through like how to continue to grow and educate them along the way? Like, I assume that's a pretty good retention tactic right there too, right? The more that they're using it, the more that they're engaged, the more likely they are to stay, right?
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And there's stuff in the product, and there's stuff that we deliver via email. We have like an entirely free academy. So academy.castos.com. It's like this giant library of how to podcast content. So yeah, it's just, we do a ton and everything we can to help folks be better podcasters and stick around for a long time, because that's just great for them and it's great for the business.
Are you looking at metrics like how often they are creating episodes? Because going back to what you were talking about earlier, if you see somebody that's typically had been posting every week and all of a sudden is having like 4, 6, 8 week gaps, they could be trailing off pretty soon, right?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I mean, we look at how active people are on the platform in general, how often they're publishing new episodes, how those episodes and podcasts are performing in terms of analytics. We're going to be getting into like advertising technology to help folks monetize their podcasts. Like, hey, how is this performing for you? How much money are you making? The more money people make, the more likely they are to stick around and grow as customers. Yeah, we have quite a bit of product analytics that show us who's the most active. And not surprisingly, like they stick around for the longest. And so it's an interesting thing. Like we simultaneously want to bring up the folks who are not as engaged, to have them be more engaged and publish more. And then the folks who are already publishing a lot and already really engaged, how do we kind of just give them room to grow within the platform? So that's things like different tools, more power within the platform, so they can be more successful than they already are.
Gotcha. I'll almost give a path for every client to go up a level, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Well, what about on the churn side? I mean, I guess given the number of clients that you've got, you can directly reach out if someone is, potentially leaving. But are you running into issues related to billing and collecting? So kind of more of that involuntary churn, or is this more of a, hey, I tried podcasting, I'm not seeing the ROI, and I'm moving on? So more of that direct churn.
Yeah, I mean, like we're very fortunate to have very low churn. And I think it's been the thing that's allowed us to grow as we have. The churn we have is almost entirely, hey, I stopped my podcast. It didn't work out. I'm gonna leave. one of the interesting things about being a hosting provider is like, even if you stop your podcast, a lot of folks stay on as customers because they want it to still be available, right? Because, it is like, if you cancel your account, your podcast just disappears, because we can't host a podcast forever, for free.
Yeah.
So it's not just like, are you publishing new stuff, but do you want the stuff that is already there to be accessible to listeners? Yeah. So getting, so that's been interesting. I think that one thing that, from a churn perspective, is a really big opportunity for SaaS businesses is expansion revenue, right? So the same number of customers pays you more money in total in a given month. That has been difficult for us because kind of just the nature of the business, it's not commonly accepted to pay like you would a MailChimp or a ConvertKit or a CRM tool or something like that, where the more listens you have or the more podcasts you have, you're willing to pay more money. It's just not as accepted in the industry. We introduced this concept of like tiers of pricing based on downloads, and they're really super generous. and like the vast majority of our customers fall in our lowest plan with that consideration. But that's the thing that, like, if I had one gripe about our business, it is that it's not inherently set up for expansion revenue, because it is just a magic, right? It's just, if you don't get any new customers, but they grow their, subscriber count, they pay you more money. That's because then you have like customer acquisition and expanding revenue of your existing customers, both working for you if you're doing things right. And we get mostly just the first part of that. Just new customers contribute to our growth for the most part.
Gotcha. How many of your like, you offer multiple plans, right? Different features and functionality within these plans. How often do they move between them?
Gracious. I don't have a number. I don't have a number on that. Not very often. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we do a bit of like feature gating and usage gating. So I was talking about like the number of downloads you have. That's like the usage gate. And then we have some features that are only available in our higher plans.
So with your existing client base, then your opportunity to expand revenue is either convince them they need more features and to move up, or have you ever done just across the board price point increases, and has that worked?
We haven't done price increases in a long time. And with inflation being what it is, like it's interesting to think about, just because everything we do is more expensive, but people aren't paying us more. Yeah. So I think that when we have done it, it's been received pretty well because it's been pretty small, on the order of like 20%, which I don't think is a huge price increase. And it's been years, like several years since we've done one. I think that folks who do price increases poorly is when they don't communicate the value of that. Like, hey, for an extra $10 a month, you're going to get this and this and this and this. And you've already had this for the last year. We just haven't charged you for it. And so now, like, we need to, start kind of charging what our product is worth now, because it's so much better than it was a year ago. And I think SaaS companies probably do a poor job of this compared to more traditional businesses. Traditional businesses are increasing prices every year. And everyone else is okay with it, right? Like, my energy bill goes up all the time. and like, what am I going to do? So yeah, I don't know if that will change here in the future, and if inflation will create an environment where people are just used to that. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I was going to say there, especially for B2B, inflation is everywhere, right? And costs are going up. Your costs have certainly gone up. And so for a B2B who isn't obviously coming out of their direct pocket, they're probably going to be more receptive to that. So do you think that creates an environment that creates opportunity for increases?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's one place where I wouldn't call us a B2B company necessarily. I would call us like B2 prosumer, probably, to where we have a bunch of hobbyists. A lot of them make some money through their podcast and their brand, and we have a lot of businesses. But we also have a lot of folks that just do it for fun. They're talking about the Green Bay Packers or Game of Thrones or whatever, and that's cool and that's awesome. But $5 extra a month, if it's your hobby, is like not insignificant.
That's true.
So yeah.
Yeah. Well, is everyone paying you on credit card? Do you accept different payment methods and any challenges there?
Yeah, it's all Bitcoin these days. No.
Oh, okay. So
No.
big roller coaster ride.
Yeah, that would be, oh man, I'd lose my mind. No, yeah, everything is credit card. We do have some of our enterprise customers that pay us with ACH, but those are all yearly subscriptions.
Oh, that's nice. Lower cost payment
Yep.
method, and they're giving you a whole year in advance. So
Yep.
gotta love those, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Well, are there any new big features or big changes for you coming down the pike soon?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing that we see in the industry is kind of the advent and the increased popularity of private podcasting and paid subscriptions, right? So previous to 2 years ago, the only way to make money podcasting is to have a bunch of ads that are garbage, right, in your podcast, and you're selling mattresses right next to your B2B podcast, about whatever your business is about, and that's just a bad experience, right, for everybody, right? The mattress company doesn't have any idea about attribution or anything like that. And you as a creator feel slimy about contaminating your content with this other kind of messaging. Right. And so, but it's the only way to make money up until a couple of years ago. And now us and a very small number of participants in our space realize that there is a really cool opportunity for creators to sell access to their content directly. And so private podcasting is, we believe, like the real future of podcasting for the creators, right? And the creator economy is massive. You look at any numbers of kind of industry reports, it's the fastest growing part of like the digital economy. And that's where we're standing, is we believe that like creators being able to charge money for their content is the future of monetization of podcasting. And we're doing our damnedest to be at the forefront of that.
Well, what then sort of content do you think leans best towards that model? Because of course you say something like that and everybody's going to go, shit, I'd love to make,
Yeah.
money off of my podcast directly, but not everybody's going to pay for that. So where do you think that works well?
You mean like what kind of content are people able to charge money for? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean the most common kind of model there is a hybrid of, you have a bunch of free content and then you have a select bit that's paid, right? So maybe it's like, I have 4 episodes a month, 3 of them are free, and if you want the extra awesome 4th one, you got to pay $5 a month. And like on the writing side, you see tools like Substack that have popularized this quite a bit, and they have a similar model, right? You can have an entirely free one, and you can have a paid one, and authors will just say, "Hey, I'm going to publish this piece. I'm going to make it all free," and that goes to everybody. And hey, if you want access to the extra special one that I put out once a month, you got to pay $5 a month. And what we're doing is the podcast version of that.
Interesting. Okay. So is that feature available now, or that's something that you guys are working
Sure
on?
is. Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, for listener, or I guess producers that are looking to do that, like what's the steps for them to kind of bring that to market?
Yeah. I mean, so I think that that there's a lot of kind of content strategy that goes along with it, and that's a whole nother conversation. But I mean, technically we use Stripe as a payment processor to partner with, and so you bring your Stripe account and connect it to Castos, and you say like, hey, I want to create this product in Stripe that's $5 or $10 a month, and we have what we call our automations engine. It's kind of like a Zapier that we built within our product to say like, when somebody purchases this product, add them to this private podcast. And so within your Castos account, you'd have a public podcast that you'd use for marketing, just the show would be hosted under it, and then you create a private podcast that's separate. And only when somebody purchases this product in your Stripe account do they get added to this private podcast, and all that happens automatically. And then if they cancel that subscription to your $10 a month super awesome private podcast, they get removed from the private podcast feed, and those feeds are unique to that individual, right? So if Bob leaves, Bob doesn't get access to my podcast anymore, but Susie still does.
Absolutely. So do those listeners who paid for the premium content then need to come to your platform to access it, or how would they do that through any of the other podcasting platforms?
Yeah. So we give options, right? So you can either download the Castos mobile app. So we have a mobile app that's available for iOS and Android. Download it, log in, you get all of the private podcast content platform wide from our platform that you're eligible to see. So if you're a subscriber to private podcasts from multiple different creators, you see all that in one place. Or as you're invited to a new private podcast, we send you an email and say, hey, here's your private RSS feed link. That's unique to you and to this podcast. And you can copy that and paste it into Overcast or, Pocket Cast or whatever kind of third-party mobile app on your phone that supports manually adding an RSS feed, because things like Spotify don't, because Spotify is like the walled garden of podcasting, right? They don't want people to come from outside and use any of their stuff, which is fine. Like, I can't fault them too much for that. But it's the cool thing about podcasting is, open RSS is a really cool, powerful platform and kind of modality. That the hard thing is that it is open, and you just have to kind of embrace that if that's the direction you go.
Well, Craig, this has been a very interesting conversation. Loved hearing about what that's like on the other side of this. I'm sitting here as a creator and someone who's got a podcast and don't always get to see like the industry behind it. So having these sort of conversations is always fascinating for me.
Yeah, awesome. This is a lot of fun. Thank you.
Well, for any of the listeners who want to learn more about Castos or maybe follow up on any of the things we talked about today, where can they go?
Yeah, so castos.com, castos.com. Check us out there. Yeah, I think, if you want to see some of the stuff we do, our YouTube channel, so youtube.com/Castos, really prolific. Matt from our team puts out, something really awesome there pretty much every week. Yeah, that's the place to check us out.
Thanks again. Wonderful learning about everything again today, and really appreciate it. Thanks, Craig.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick.